So, try and keep this one shorter than the last one. Maybe 30 minutes instead of almost an hour. So, where we left off last time talking about MST. Also,
Multi-systemic therapy.
yeah, that one. Um, it's been a while since we did anything with it. So, how did we get hooked up with MST? Do you remember? Because I don't 100%.
I think the kids were in therapy and there was the incident with the boys that got reported and that they're one of the therapists, which,
So, it was like a referral.
yeah,
And then Courtney was, I love her to death. Amazing at what she did.
mm-hmm.
Um, so the way that it kind of worked and went down, she came over to the house. It was all done here. We didn't do that in an office, not
Nope.
even the first visit.
Yeah, she came here and essentially did an enrollment of sorts. Just asked basic questions and just what some of the concerns were and where what we wanted to do with that.
It was very fast paced. The program is
Yes.
very fast.
Yeah, she was here what 3 times a week
Yes.
for an
And
hour.
we did a lot in every single visit.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I know there was a group of items that we had to go over initially before we started. What problems we wanted addressed.
And I know she asked a lot of the questions like how we were already addressing them, how, what we were doing was working. I know all of those kind of things. And I can't remember a lot of the terminology, but I know there was
It's been a long
certain
time.
plans and like you had to, they're called fits. I remember that.
Yes, yes.
But and it was essentially just like what was the problem, what were we doing, and that's really what it was. It's like, and how were we going to change what we did
Okay.
to help change what he was doing.
We didn't have a huge list of behaviors, I don't
I think there was like
believe.
three.
Um, and I think one thing that, on topic but off topic, was some of the behaviors that we had to address. We had to address. We didn't have a great deal, or according to the kids, we had a great deal of issue with, but in all reality, we didn't have a great issue with. One of those, as an example, is the weed habit. Um, I mean, it's part of today's culture. It's in society. It's decriminalized in most states. There's not consequences for it, but we still had to address the behavior because he was underage. It was not appropriate.
Well, and there's other kiddos that were still heavily influenced by the older kids, so that was a thing.
Another one was, and that was actually the primary. Another one was aggression.
Right. That was, I think, the reason for the
Probably,
referral
and I
was
think it
that.
was truly our biggest concern
Right.
out of any of them. So, just to kind of fly by with it, she came over to the house. We talked about the behaviors we wanted addressed, and she really limited us too. She was, and I don't want to throw out quotes, but I'm pretty sure, pretty close to a quote that she had come up with is, "Pick your battles." Is that really something that you
Right.
need to address? Is it really something that you're willing to fight over? And she left it entirely up to us. I mean, if we had told her we wanted the kids to eat every morsel off of their plate at every meal, she would have supported us in
Yes.
that being something we wanted to be concerned with. But she did tell us, limit what you're attacking. You can always move into other smaller things as time goes by. But truly, I think a lot of the smaller behaviors corrected on their own throughout the process of doing MST anyway. So what came after, uh, you know, deciding what the issues were that we wanted to address? And I think, just again on topic but off topic, she made it. She didn't care if he was listening to us talking.
Right.
And we had a lot of conversations regarding him sitting right directly in front of him, and it was up to him. I mean, he was not invited into our conversations, and when things were chimed in, she rarely even addressed or spoke back really much to him because it was we were setting out the expectations, and we didn't mind if he heard us setting out the expectations. It was just going to be what it was going to be. I don't know that I would recommend having, and she didn't either recommend having the kids there where we did go sit outside for a lot of it,
Yeah,
in
and
the
if
office
that
outside.
particular child that we were doing MST with needed to hear what we were talking about, then that just that one individual child came out and would sit with us for that 5 minutes, and that was it.
And I wouldn't recommend having the kids
No,
in
because
there.
it really is about the work of the caregivers or the parents or whoever's looking and responsible for that child. That's who it really ultimately is focused towards.
Right. But if they do hear, it's not a big deal.
Right.
So moving into the next piece, what was the next piece? It
Well, I
moved
know we
so
did.
rapidly that
Yeah,
it's
well, we
hard to
did
recall.
we identified the concerns and like what our goals were for that, and then we would do the fits, and the fits essentially were just a matter of what's the goal, what's the current behavior, and how are you going to get there? Like, what does that look like? And then, of course, between sessions, we had to, if we said this is the expectation, and if that expectation isn't met, this is what we're going to do, then we had to do that in between and like give feedback to, let her know how it went, good or bad, and then she would help to
And that
like
was a struggle
redirect. Yeah.
when you, in a nutshell, we, again, talking about the cell phones, the video games, TVs, we just didn't do that with our kids. Where you may have a lot of parents nowadays that I'm going to take your device, I'm going to limit your TV time, I'm going to limit your computer time. We didn't have those as an option.
Right. So coming up with, I guess, if you want to call them consequences, that's kind of what we call them. But
That was a
coming up with
struggle.
that was huge. And so I know at one point we had to look at more of would it be better to reward them for the
Mm-hmm.
positive versus the consequence thing because that just didn't seem to work.
And that's where the phase program ultimately came in.
Right.
Was rewarding the good behavior, but when the good behavior wasn't there, the reward went away, not there was a consequence. Um,
Because
and
ultimately, not getting the reward was the consequence, but it
exactly.
wasn't as negative as, oh, well, you know, here's your punishment kind of thing. It was more,
And
it was just laid out.
we turned it into, I don't remember if it was 90 days or 6 months to go from the very bottom to the very top. I don't
I think
I
it was like 6 months.
It was a long time to get there. But it was very easy to get there at the same
Yeah.
time. And I know we had pretty sure 6 phases. Or was it?
Yeah. Well, because we counted zero. We
Right.
had 0 to 5. So essentially a 6.
And we started them all out on, I think it was phase 4 when we first
It was
implemented.
pretty high.
But it was nice that we could create that phase program and it fit all the kids.
Mm-hmm.
Because it wasn't just one child with negative behavior. I mean, our kids are normal human being children, so they all had negative behaviors. Now, we did have Grayson, who was quite a bit younger, so he did have his
Yeah.
own piece on the side.
But it was minimal and very short lived.
And we even created the purple clothespins
Mm-hmm.
where they could all, once they all did a thing to earn that clothespin, there was a massive reward for the whole family.
Like a family outing to the zoo or the aquarium or something.
So phase 0 was the child was limited to their room
Mm-hmm.
for 24 hours, and at the end of that 24 hours, they had to provide us with a written essay about their behavior, how it affected them, and how it affected the family, and also how it affected, if applicable, a specific another person. If it was,
Right.
you clock your brother in the dome piece, how did that affect him? That was phase zero, which several of them ended up there a couple of times actually.
And it was all, I mean, with the papers, it was all based on grade level as well, like their understanding and their ability to actually write
But it
something.
gave
And so
us an
for the
insight into them.
younger kiddos, it was not quite as lengthy, but as long as they could put thought into it and
It helped
we
us understand
still met them where they were as
where
far
they were
as.
at, and as they grew, we were able to track that.
Yes.
And then phase one, and this may actually make it easier to remember how many phases exactly. Phase one was grounded to the house.
Mhm.
The only, I do believe the only phase that devices were not allowed was phase zero, or maybe phase one.
I think it was 0 and 1. Everything else they got them, but it was very limited, or like they got more time as they were up higher.
And then phase one, I think, was like 2 days or three
It was like
days.
48 hours or something. Like, yeah,
And
like two
very
days.
short, and there was no essay required. It was just follow the rules for that 48 hours. As
You
an
just couldn't leave
example,
the house. You didn't have to be in your room. You could be in the living room, kitchen, whatever. You just couldn't go
go outside.
outside,
Phase
which was big for them because they actually like to
mm-hmm.
play outside or
Football
sit
in the
out on the
street.
porch or whatever.
And then phase three was our property. And I
Right.
think that one was like a full week or something
You
similar.
couldn't leave the sidewalk. They had to stay within
Our
our
physical
lot.
property.
Yes, backyard, front yard, sidewalk. That was it.
And then phase three allowed the prayer property behind us, which used to be a field, and then went, a block this way, and then I think 4 blocks that way, and 3 blocks behind us. And they were able to play with friends and do stuff, but not go inside anybody's house without informing us at that point.
Yeah, so that eliminated the park. Like they still couldn't go to the park. They
Mm-hmm.
couldn't go to Dollar General or Loaf and Jug.
Exactly.
They were still held within those certain boundaries.
And that one I think was like 2 weeks or three
And I want
weeks
to say it
or
was 2 weeks.
something similar to that. And then see, one, two, three. That was what? 0 room, 1 house, 2 property, three. So phase four allowed property down at the school so they could go to the field and play with their friends, play football, basketball. It included all the way over to Loaf and Jug, Dollar General, and then that one I want to say was a month or
Yeah.
something similar to that. And then phase five allowed all. I don't know. Was it more property, or is that where we started including being able to spend nights at friends'
That's
houses,
where we included
and
that.
friends coming over?
They still had the same property boundary as long as like for that, but then they if they wanted to go spend the night with friends. I mean, I don't, and I think on phase 4 they could too, but they had the W sheet. Remember?
And then phase six went like down to the city park. It was a
Oh,
big,
that was fine
big.
because we only had the because 0 counts as number 6. We only had 5.
I don't remember.
Yeah.
And then they did have, in order to request to do things, they did have the W sheet, which they had, we laminated so they could write on them with dry erase markers and reuse them. When they were going to be home, where they were going to be, who was going to be there, what they were going to be doing. Didn't ask why. The what kind of covered the why. But they had to
But
fill
when,
that
where,
out. And
how they were getting home or getting there, those
mm-hmm.
types of things. Phone numbers, if needed, to if we didn't already have them for wherever they were, to be
Mm-hmm.
able to get a hold of them. Yeah.
And then
And that had to be filled out and given to us. And that was their way of asking to go do.
mm-hmm.
They did not like that at all.
And they had we had the phase chart in there, and they had their clips that they moved up and down. I think it was a big poster board,
Mm-hmm.
and they moved their clips up and down based on what phase they were at. it worked really well. And it was, if you, and then we had the rules side of it. Don't touch another person without permission.
Which essentially was the expectations for the house as like a
You're right.
community, so society
I don't remember
expectations.
what all we had. Don't touch another person. Don't touch another person's property without permission. No cursing or cussing or something like that at another person. It is fair to say we did allow our children to use curse words in an appropriate fashion, what we deem appropriate.
Right.
So, not calling somebody out of their name, not berating, belittling somebody with foul language, but come home from school and say, "Damn, that shit was hard today." We didn't have an issue with.
Right.
But cursing at another person was not allowed. We did not allow them into each other's rooms without permission. They had to knock before they went into another person's room. Be home on time, be punctual.
Right.
And then Caesar better in school was
Yes.
another expectation. And then be home a specific time after the last bell at school. And I
Which I
think
think we give them like 30 minutes. And they live, I mean,
we live a
literally,
block
we're a
away
block
from the
away
school.
from the school, but they still got at least 30 minutes.
Go hang out with friends for a few
And if
minutes,
there was,
visit.
if they had football practice, which a couple of them did, one was a manager, one was a player, like those things are different, of course. We took those
All
into
taken into consideration.
consideration. Um,
But then when they broke a rule, and it didn't matter which rule it was, when they broke a rule, they dropped a phase. When they completed the time on that phase, they went back up to the next phase level. We had a couple of kids that dropped 2 or 3 phases in a matter of a day or two because they just wanted to keep going and going
yes.
and going. Um,
But they always knew too, like once that was laid out and it was on the wall and they could read it and they knew what it was just like we very rarely had to say you dropped a phase. Like we just be like, that's not okay. And they already knew. They would go
mm-hmm.
and they would change it and they knew what the next one and they would go read it. There were a few times when we first started that I remember we had to tell them, what does that phase say? Because they had to get used to what it
Well,
meant.
they would come and ask us, "Can I do something?" And one of
We'd send
our
them back
questions
and be
is, "What
like,
phase are you on?
yes, what does that
Is
phase
your
say?
homework done? Are your chores done?"
Mm-hmm.
And then I did laundry most of the time until the very end, where twice a week or once a week, I don't remember. Everybody bring their laundry out. I run it through, put it back in their rooms for them to put away. Once everybody was home, I think during COVID, I don't know if we may have ended this before. Yeah, I think no, we started going on during COVID, maybe.
Was modified only because we were all here all the
But
time, but
they had chores
they
one
each had
day
a
a week.
laundry day.
They each had a laundry day, and then we rotated through the dishes. I think each of them had the dishes once a week, and then I did a couple. I don't remember, but I
We had
think
the whiteboard with the schedule on it, and it was written out, and so they could see who's dish or night or Alexa. We did the reminders on that.
That was handy for shower time.
Here's the upcoming reminder. Lock the back door every day at 9 p.m.
Yeah, we still have it. Great for shower times, chore days, all that stuff.
Yeah.
Reminding them to do medicine. I mean, with 5 kids and 2 adults, without the reminders in there.
School in the morning,
what
especially
time
for the little ones.
that was their alarm clocks. Yeah. That was what time to walk to the bus. What time they were allowed to leave to go to the school. It was all done by that. So we had a schedule, and I know kids thrive on structure. They thrive on structure. You're not gonna win without structure. Your kid is not gonna know what to do, where to be, and if you're not structured in your disciplines, your rewards, your expectations, your consequences, you're wishy washy with them, and they don't know one day to the next. Well, yesterday it was okay to slap my brother, but because you're in a bad mood today, I can't slap my brother. And the kids did bring that up to us before we did MST. And when we looked back at it, it was like, but my mood can't dictate.
But we also did family meetings. Mm-hmm. And sometimes we do utilize dinner for that, sometimes not, because that dinner time was more of just let's be together, mm-hmm. and not so much we didn't want anybody upset and getting up and walking away kind of things. But we did family meetings and stuff, and especially when we started doing MST. And I think the kids got used to being able to feel comfortable and being able to just say how they felt. However, we did ask them to do it appropriately, and sure. I think they all did, and they still do. But I think it's normal for pushback, and that we got that initially
early on.
Just initially,
she warned us it would happen.
Yes, but that is.
She said, normal. Just stick with it though, and just do it. Just do what you're gonna do based on what they did, and they'll come around, and they did.
It's fair, firm, and consistent. I hate that saying sometimes, but it is really what it is. Because if you're fair with all of the kids, like like we did, expectations. I say consequences, but consequences, rewards, faith. That whole program was very fair for all of the kids, and that's why they all fit into it. And we were firm on what our expectations were for our house and how it was going to run. And then we were always consistent. Mm-hmm. Not always. We're human, of course, but we knew when we weren't. They knew when we weren't, and we allowed them to tell us.
And they called us out. They did.
And they did that with each other though too. And I think that's only fair because again, we're still human. And if they notice and we're not, and they can say something, then that would be like, ooh, yeah, like, hey, yeah, you're right. I wasn't doing that right. Let me try again. I still have to try again. Like, we still got to get this right.
And I think that's something that we can definitely go into in another video is how we spoke to our kids and how they spoke to us and how even to this day, our kids that are grown call us and come home to us and say, I'm feeling like this. What does that mean? I don't understand this concept in life. What does that mean? Or so and so bullied me at work today and I feel bad about it. Just like they did when they were younger, it's continued where that relationship never stopped. It's still there. And I think that's definitely something, how to have a conversation, how we had a conversation, how we encourage them, and how, when we asked our kids, are you high? They were like, yep, sure. Did you drink while you were at that party? Yep, I sure did. Are your grades good? Nope, my grades are ass. Yep. Did you turn your work in? Nope, I decided not to do it. Our kids rarely, I don't know. They don't lie. Our kids don't.
It was very rare, and they would. It was like they would try, and then like halfway through, they were like they knew, and they were like, I can't lie to you. Like I have to tell you, and it was just because we didn't. Well,
I didn't judge.
We didn't react poorly, I suppose. Right. Not that there's a right or a wrong way to react. However, you just have to know your kid, mm-hmm. And we just. There was not a lot of reaction in the sense to make them feel like they couldn't come in.
I think that's definitely another video that we could go into, mm-hmm. What those family meetings and then what our encouragement and what some of our even our conversations looked like, and the topics and the depth of them and all that. But MST then in a nutshell is figure out the behavior, limit it to the ones you want to have a struggle over. Does it matter if your kid ate all their food? No.
Right, because MST is a lot about choices.
Does it matter?
Caregivers and the child.
Does it matter if your kid's shirt matches their shorts? Nope. You have to pick and choose what you're going to attack at any given time.
Right.
Create a set of rules surrounding those things and make the rules broad enough that they encompass everything you want, but narrow enough that the child understands based on where they're at in life. Understands what your goals are, and then what your consequence list is. And we chose the phase program because they ran it on their own.
Yep.
And we knew where they were at, and then I think the accountability piece with the W sheet as an example, or
Yeah, because at one point we stopped doing that because every time they wanted to go do something, they didn't need the sheet anymore. They would just come and say all of those things.
mm-hmm.
And it really was just a tool to help them learn how to do it. And then they
And that
didn't
was
have
how we
to.
raised our kids in the 21st century. Honestly, that's what it all boiled down to. Is just that simple. You don't have to. Something else that I wanted to bring up that she brought up is the consequence has to fit the crime, but the consequence needs to be brief and in the moment, which is where phase zero and phase one were 24 hours and 48 hours, brief in the moment. That piece is done, and that was the only two that they couldn't have devices. Now, once they hit other phases, we did allow them to have the phones in their room overnight, but that was once they got up to phase three, four, five, whatever phase it was. They were allowed to have the device in there. Otherwise, they were in a basket overnight. They were never allowed during chore time
Yeah,
to
like
have their
phase two,
devices.
they could have them when they got home from school, but it had to go in the basket at bedtime. And phase three, they could take it to school with them, but they still turn in at bedtime. And then phase four,
Pretty much all the time, I think.
yeah, four and five both, I think, were no, because we had to. Five was they had it all the time at school, everything like that. But yeah, we just kind of tapered it down. Each phase was a little less time.
But we had it set up to where,
or tablet, even it didn't have to be.
right,
It was
the devices, whatever devices they had, and it was the consequence was just phase zero and one essentially. From there, you're earning your reward. That's all you're doing is you're rewarding yourself through good behavior. And you talk to people. Oh, I took my kid's phone away for 3 months. Well, after the initial 24, 48 hours, depending on the age of the child, that's no longer a consequence because they're used to life without it. So they don't have anything to look forward to at that point. I don't have my device for 3 months. And what goes through their mind is to hell with it. Then I'm just going to act up anyway because now what are you going to do?
Yeah, there's nothing left to take away.
I mean, and
I think that's why we tapered it the way we did too,
Mhm.
because they still had those things. They still
Sure.
had access to those things.
They
could
just
still go play
rewarded
outside.
themselves going
Yeah.
up.
Just by doing those things that they knew they were supposed to do, doing the right thing.
Or,
They just knew.
You ground your kid, you're grounded for a month. That child is not learning anything after that 48 hours. Even a kid who's 15, 16 years old is not learning any consequence at that point because they go to school and borrow a friend's phone or whatever,
Well,
or they bring a phone home that somebody else gave them to use while you have theirs. They're not learn. All they do is find and learn loopholes around the consequence that you.
But that's how we came up with the boundary thing versus devices versus going to a friend's house because our kids didn't really care to go to friends' houses anyway. Like that wasn't really a huge thing with our kids. They weren't always asking to go to a friend's house. So I think that's why we came up with the boundaries versus those other consequences because that made more sense.
Dollar General and Loaf and Jug and the school meant more than anything in the world, and being able to have their phones at night.
Yes.
That was, I think, the three biggest things that really ultimately mattered to any of them.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
All right. So next time we're going to talk about communication, how we went over creating that open dialogue without a bunch of lies and fishing for the truth. And I think something else to throw at that moment was our communication with the school, how we handled issues at school, because it was very unique having two kids with an IEP. One with severe disabilities, and then other that we'll talk about. But I think next video we can definitely go into some of those different things. So, all right, well, we're at 29 minutes and 30 seconds. We did good.
Okay.
Hopefully we get questions. I don't know how many people are watching, but we'll see.